The morning was supposed to be a peaceful one. Sunlight spilled across the freshly painted counter of Rose's roadside coffee stand, giving it a warm, inviting glow. Rose tied her apron with her usual care, ready to serve the community she loved. But the sudden rumble of motorcycles shattered the morning calm, shaking the ground as 6 bikers rode up. Their intimidating presence made everyone tense. Customers exchanged nervous glances, while Rose maintained her steady smile. She had faced tougher situations in her life. Today would be no different. The leader of the group, Brick, a tall, muscular man with a thick beard, dismounted his bike and approached the stand, his eyes scanning the crowd. "Looks like a nice little spot," he sneered. Rose knew trouble when she saw it. But she was no ordinary woman behind a coffee counter. Unknown to these bikers, she was Judge Rose Patterson, who had faced countless criminals in her courtroom over her career. Today, however, it seemed she would be dishing out justice with a side of coffee. If you're enjoying this story so far, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe if you love tales about unexpected heroes standing up for what's right. We've got more like this coming your way. Brick and his crew pushed their way to the front of the line, ignoring the customers waiting patiently. "Morning, sweetheart," Brick said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Why don't you serve us first?" Rose smiled calmly. "There's a line, gentlemen. Everyone follows the same rules here." Brick's grin turned into a scowl. "Maybe you didn't hear me right. This is our spot now, and we make the rules." An old customer, Frank, a retired veteran, clenched his jaw, ready to step in. But Rose gave him a subtle nod, signaling him to stay put. She leaned slightly forward, her voice unwavering. "Actually, this is my sister's business and everyone, including you, follows the rules here." The bikers exchanged looks, their laughter cutting through the growing tension. Brick leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Lady, you don't know who you're messing with." Rose locked eyes with him, her gaze steady. "And you don't know who you're threatening." "My name is Rose Patterson, Federal Judge Rose Patterson. You and I, Mr. Brick, have an appointment next week in my courtroom." Her words struck Brick like a punch. He blinked, visibly thrown off balance, his bravado fading for a split second. The rest of the crew shifted, uneasily glancing at each other. Brick's smirk returned, though it lacked the confidence it had before. "A judge, huh? Serving coffee. What a joke. Do you think that scares me?" He tried to keep his voice steady, but there was an unmistakable tremor. Rose tilted her head, still calm. "It should, Mr. Brick. You see, I've spent years dealing with men like you. Men who think they can intimidate and bully their way through life. But let me tell you, the law has a funny way of catching up to people like that." Her words were direct, and each one seemed to push Brick further into uncertainty. One of Brick's men, a wiry fellow called Rat, nudged him. "Come on, Brick, let's get out of here. This ain't worth it." Brick shot Rat a glare, but even he could feel the shift in the air. The confidence that had carried them in was beginning to slip away, replaced by an uncomfortable realization that they might have underestimated the woman behind the counter. The other customers, emboldened by Rose's stance, started murmuring in agreement. "Yeah, there's a line here," one shouted. "We don't need troublemakers like you," added another. Brick's scowl deepened as he turned back to Rose, searching for something to say. He wanted to lash out, to reassert his dominance, but the unwavering look in her eyes left him with few options. Finally, he took a step back, his face flushed with frustration. "This isn't over, Judge," he spat, his voice dripping with defiance. He motioned to his crew, and they reluctantly began backing away. "You think you can hide behind your robe, but we'll be back." Rose kept her eyes on Brick, her smile calm yet firm. "I'll be waiting, Mr. Brick. But remember, every action has a consequence. I suggest you think very carefully about what those consequences might be." The tension hung in the air as Brick and his men walked back to their bikes, their bravado visibly shaken. The roar of their engines filled the small space as they sped away, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with a mixture of fear and newfound courage. Frank let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "You handled that like a pro, Rose," he said, admiration clear in his voice. "You really showed them." Rose glanced at him, her expression softening. People like them, Frank. They think power comes from intimidation. But real power comes from standing up for what's right, even when it's not easy. She turned back to the counter, picking up a coffee pot as if nothing had happened. Now, who needs a refill? The customers, once filled with fear, now felt a sense of solidarity. The old veteran Frank stepped back up to the counter, a grin spreading across his face. "I'll take one, Rose, and make it extra strong. Seems like we might need it." The small crowd laughed, the tension beginning to lift. Rose poured the coffee, her smile unwavering, and the line resumed as if the morning had never been interrupted. But everyone there knew that something had changed. Rose wasn't just a coffee server. She was a protector, someone who wasn't afraid to face down trouble. And because of her courage, the people in that little roadside stand felt just a bit braver too. As she handed Frank his coffee, Rose looked out at the road, watching as the bikers disappeared into the distance. She knew they would be back, but she also knew she would be ready, not just as a judge, but as someone who stood for what was right, no matter where she was. The morning sun continued to shine, casting a golden glow over the coffee stand, and Rose couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. Today, she had taken a stand, and tomorrow, she would do it again if needed. Justice wasn't just in the courtroom. It was here, in every choice, every moment, every cup of coffee served with a side of courage. Brick's smirk reappeared, though it lacked the previous confidence. A judge, huh? Serving coffee. What will people think about that? Rose shrugged, her smile unwavering. They'll probably think I'm just another person standing up for what's right. The bikers hesitated, realizing this wasn't going to be as easy as they'd thought. "This isn't over, Your Honor," Brick finally said, his voice dripping with mockery. He turned to his crew, jerking his head toward their bikes. "Let's ride." As the bikers roared out of the parking lot, Rose turned back to her customers, her expression softening. She resumed serving coffee as if nothing had happened, the tension slowly dissipating. Frank, who had been watching with admiration, shook his head. "You sure have a way of dealing with trouble, Rose." She gave him a gentle smile. "Trouble is just another kind of customer, Frank. You serve them with fairness, and sometimes they learn." The crowd began to relax, and the normal buzz of the morning returned. Rose continued pouring coffee, exchanging kind words with her regulars, as if the threat that had just left the parking lot was nothing more than a fleeting inconvenience. But beneath her calm demeanor, she was carefully considering what might happen next. Frank stayed near the counter, his eyes glancing towards the road where the bikers had disappeared. "You think they'll be back?" Rose paused, then nodded. "Probably. But the important thing is, we don't let them scare us. Fear gives them power, Frank. If they come back, we show them the same thing again. Respect, rules, and courage." Frank chuckled. "Respect, rules, and courage. You sound like you're still in the courtroom." Rose smiled at that. "Maybe I am. Just because I'm not wearing my robe doesn't mean I stop being who I am." She looked at the coffee stand, her sister's dream, and felt a renewed sense of purpose. This is our community, and it's worth standing up for. A young mother with her child approached the counter. The little boy looked up at Rose, his eyes wide. "Were those bad men, Miss Rose?" Rose knelt down to his level, her smile gentle. "They were men who made some bad choices, sweetheart. But we treat everyone with kindness, and sometimes that can help them make better choices next time." The boy nodded, seeming to understand in his own way. His mother smiled gratefully at Rose before taking their order and stepping aside. As the day wore on, Rose couldn't help but think about the line she had drawn today, not just for herself, but for everyone there. It was a declaration that fear would not dictate their lives, that no one would come into their community and take away their sense of safety. She knew the bikers would be back, but she also knew she wasn't alone. The people around her, Frank, her sister, the regulars, they were her allies. Together, they would face whatever came next, with strength, resilience, and a belief that right would always prevail. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Rose continued her work, knowing that today, she had drawn a new line. A line that said, "Here, we stand for each other." And that, more than anything, gave her hope. 2 days later, the bikers returned, this time in greater numbers. The roar of their motorcycles filled the air, and nervous whispers spread among the customers at the coffee stand. Rose, already at her post, had anticipated their return. Brick dismounted, his face flushed with anger. This time, the gang surrounded the small stand, their presence meant to intimidate. Brick walked up, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "We're back, Judge. Ready for round 2? Rose glanced at her sister, Linda, who was standing nervously by the espresso machine. "Linda, why don't you head to the back for a bit?" Linda nodded, her face pale but resolute. Rose then addressed Brick. "You came all the way back for coffee?" "No," Brick growled. "We came back for respect. You embarrassed us." Rose stepped out from behind the counter, her apron still tied around her waist. "Respect is earned, Mr. Brick. You can't demand it by threatening people." Brick gestured to one of his men, who stepped forward, a baseball bat in hand. "Maybe you'll respect us after we take apart this stand," he said with a malicious grin. Rose held her ground. "Or maybe, after today, you'll find out what true respect looks like." She gestured subtly towards the security cameras her sister had installed. "Everything you do here today is being recorded. And next week, you'll find yourself not just facing me as a judge, but facing the law with every bit of evidence of your actions." The bikers hesitated, their confidence wavering. The customers, many of whom had initially backed away, started to gather closer, silently standing behind Rose. Frank stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "You heard the lady. This is our community, and we stand by her." Brick looked around, realizing the tables had turned. The gang's intimidation had failed. Instead of fear, they faced solidarity. He sneered, but it was clear his resolve had faltered. "You think this is over, Judge?" "That's up to you," Rose replied, her voice steady. "You can either keep fighting a losing battle, or you can choose a better path." Brick's face hardened, but behind the bravado, doubt flickered. He glanced at his crew, who seemed just as uncertain. The weight of the cameras, the eyes of the community, and Rose's unwavering stance bore down on them. One of the bikers, a younger man named Jimmy, shifted uncomfortably. "Brick, maybe we should just go. This ain't worth it." Brick shot Jimmy a hard glare, but the murmurs from the crowd and the sight of the camera lenses glinting in the sun seemed to sap his determination. He exhaled sharply, the sound filled with frustration and reluctance. "You think you're clever, Judge?" Brick said, trying to regain some of his bluster. "You think a few cameras are going to change anything?" Rose didn't flinch. "I think people can change, Brick, if they want to. It's your choice whether you want to keep being feared, or if you want to be respected, truly respected. But you won't get that by tearing people down." For a moment, silence hung heavy over the stand, broken only by the rumble of idling engines. Then, slowly, Brick turned and walked back toward his bike, the others following his lead. He paused before mounting, pointing a finger at Rose. "This isn't over," he muttered, though the threat had lost much of its sting. "Maybe not," Rose replied, her voice carrying across the parking lot, "but it could be the beginning of something better. That's up to you." The bikers mounted their motorcycles, their engines roaring to life as they began to pull away. The crowd watched as they departed, a collective breath of relief passing through them as the sound of the engines faded into the distance. Frank stepped up to Rose, his eyes still fixed on the horizon where the bikers had disappeared. "You think they'll come back again?" Rose sighed, a mix of exhaustion and determination in her eyes. "Maybe, but if they do, we'll be here, just like today. We're not going anywhere. This is our home, and no one's going to take that away from us." Linda emerged from the back, her face still pale but her expression resolute. "You did it, Rose," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You stood up to them again." Rose gave her sister a reassuring smile, pulling her into a gentle hug. "We did it, Linda. All of us. It's not just about me. It's about everyone here who decided not to back down." The customers gathered closer, some clapping, others offering words of support. The sense of community was palpable, stronger than any fear the bikers had tried to instill. Frank raised his coffee cup, to Rose and to standing up for what's right. The crowd echoed the sentiment, and Rose felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the morning sun. It was hope. Hope that even the toughest battles could be won, not through violence or intimidation, but through unity, resilience, and the courage to stand together. She looked around at the faces of her neighbors, her friends, and knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The line was drawn, and this time, it was a line of people, united, unbreakable, and ready for whatever storm might come their way. The following week, Brick found himself in a courtroom, just as Rose had predicted. This time, however, the intimidating aura he had carried was nowhere to be found. Instead, he stood before the bench with a downcast look, flanked by his lawyer. Judge Rose Patterson entered, wearing her robes, the same composure on her face that she had worn behind the coffee counter. Brick's lawyer spoke first, attempting to plead down the charges. But Rose listened, her expression unreadable. Finally, she looked at Brick directly. "Mr. Brick, it seems you have a choice to make. You can continue down this path of intimidation and find yourself in and out of jail for the rest of your life. Or, you could decide today to be better than that." Brick shifted, clearly uncomfortable. He hadn't expected a lecture. He had expected sentencing. "What are you offering?" he mumbled. Rose leaned forward slightly. "Community service. Not just any community service, but specifically, you and your crew will help rebuild and support the businesses you threatened. You will learn what it means to earn respect, not through fear, but through contribution." The courtroom fell silent. Brick looked back at his crew, who were sitting behind him, their expressions mixed with uncertainty and hope. Slowly, he turned back to Rose and nodded. "We'll do it," he said, his voice barely audible. Rose nodded in return, her gaze softening slightly. "This is not an easy path, Mr. Brick, but it is one that could lead you to something far more rewarding than intimidation ever could. You will report to the community center every morning and work alongside the people you've wronged. It will take time, and it will take effort, but this is your chance to turn things around." Brick swallowed hard, a mix of emotions crossing his face. Anger, fear, but also something resembling hope. He glanced back at his crew again, and one by one, they nodded in support. It was a reluctant nod, but it was enough. "All right," Brick said, his voice steadier. "We'll do it." Rose gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Very well. Court is adjourned." She banged the gavel, and the room began to stir. Brick's lawyer patted him on the back, whispering something in his ear, but Brick's eyes were focused on Rose. As the courtroom emptied, Brick approached the bench cautiously. "Judge," he began, his voice low, "why are you doing this? Why give us a chance?" Rose looked at him for a moment before answering. "Because everyone deserves a chance to be better, Mr. Brick. I believe that people can change, but only if they choose to. You made some bad decisions, but today, you chose differently. That's worth something." Brick nodded, a flicker of understanding passing through his eyes. He turned to leave, his crew following behind him, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a strange sense of relief, like a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying had started to lift. The next day, Brick and his crew arrived at the community center. The sun was just rising, casting a golden glow over the small town. They were met by Linda, Rose's sister, who stood by the entrance with her arms crossed, her expression wary but determined. "So, you showed up," Linda said, her voice guarded. "I hope you're ready to work." Brick nodded, a serious look on his face. "We're ready." Linda led them to the back of the community center, where a pile of supplies waited. There were planks of wood, paint cans, brushes, and tools. "We're rebuilding the playground first," she said. "It's for the kids. You think you can handle that?" Brick looked at the supplies, then at his crew. He nodded. "Yeah, we can handle it." The first few hours were awkward. The bikers were unused to this kind of work, manual labor without any of the adrenaline or aggression that usually fueled their actions. But as the hours wore on, something shifted. They started to fall into a rhythm. They worked quietly, the sound of hammers and saws filling the air. Children watched from a distance, their curiosity evident. Some of them whispered to each other, pointing at the bikers. Brick noticed, and for a moment, Shame flickered across his face. He had been a source of fear for these kids, and now, here he was, trying to build something for them. As the day progressed, Linda brought out sandwiches and water, setting them on a table nearby. "Take a break," she called. The bikers hesitated, then slowly put down their tools and gathered around the table. Linda handed Brick a sandwich, her eyes meeting his. "You keep this up, and maybe you'll start to understand what real respect feels like," she said quietly. Brick took the sandwich, nodding. "I think I'm starting to get it," he replied, his voice sincere. By the end of the day, the outline of the new playground was beginning to take shape. The bikers stood back, looking at their work with a sense of accomplishment they hadn't felt in a long time. It was different from the rush of power they were used to. This was quieter, more fulfilling. As they packed up their tools, Linda approached Brick. "Same time tomorrow?" Brick nodded. "Yeah, we'll be here." Linda gave him a small smile. "Good. We're not done yet." Brick watched her walk away, then turned to his crew. They were tired, covered in sweat and dust, but there was a different energy among them, something almost hopeful. He looked at the playground they had started to build and felt, for the first time, that maybe, just maybe, they could be part of something good. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the community center. Brick and his crew climbed onto their bikes, the roar of the engines filling the quiet evening air. But this time, the roar wasn't a symbol of intimidation. It was a promise to return, to build, to change. 2 weeks later, Brick and his crew were at Rose's coffee stand, this time not to intimidate, but to work. They were painting the walls, repairing the counter, and even helping Linda with new signage. The transformation was not just physical. There was a change in the air, a sense of purpose, a hint of redemption. Linda watched them work, her nervousness replaced by cautious optimism. Frank approached Rose, who was overseeing the repairs. "Do you think they'll really change?" he asked. Rose smiled, her eyes watching Brick as he helped a young boy fix a wobbly table. "Change takes time, Frank. But today, they're taking the first step, and sometimes that's all it takes." Brick glanced up at Rose, giving her a nod of acknowledgement. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for Rose, that was enough. This was about more than just justice. It was about giving people the chance to be better, to be part of a community rather than standing against it. The townspeople watched, some from a distance, others stepping closer to offer a hand or share a kind word. A few children played nearby, their laughter ringing out across the lot. Linda, noticing the shift in atmosphere, decided to approach Brick as he was painting a section of the wall. "You're pretty good at that," she said, nodding towards the neat strokes of paint. Brick looked up, a little surprised by the compliment. He gave a small, almost shy smile. "I guess it's easier when you're not trying to scare people off." Linda chuckled softly. "Maybe you've got a future in painting, you know? Honest work has a way of feeling better than intimidation." Brick paused, his gaze drifting over to his crew, who were similarly engrossed in their tasks. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think I'm starting to see that." As the day drew on, the coffee stand began to look revitalized. The fresh paint glistened in the sunlight, the repaired counter stood sturdier than before, and the new sign Linda had been working on with the help of one of the bikers looked bright and welcoming. It wasn't just a physical transformation. It was a symbol of the change happening within Brick and his crew. The moment of true change came when a little girl, no older than 6, approached Brick cautiously. She held out a small, handmade card. "Thank you for fixing my favorite place," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Brick knelt down, taking the card with care. It was a simple drawing of the coffee stand with a big heart above it. He looked at the girl, his eyes softening. "You're welcome," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're just getting started." Rose watched the exchange, her heart swelling with hope. This was what it was all about, bridging the gap, building something better, one small step at a time. And today, it felt like they had finally started down that path together. Months later, the coffee stand was thriving. The bikers had become regulars, not as troublemakers, but as protectors. They had taken on community projects, helping elderly neighbors, fixing playgrounds, and organizing charity rides. Brick, once feared, was now respected, not because of his strength, but because of his actions. Rose stood behind the counter, serving coffee to a line of customers, her heart full as she watched the community she loved grow stronger, more united. Brick and his crew sat at a table, laughing and talking with Frank and other regulars. The transformation was real, and it was beautiful. Sometimes, Rose thought, justice wasn't about handing down sentences. Sometimes, it was about giving people the chance to change, to write a new story for themselves. And as she served coffee, she knew this story was just the beginning of something greater.